Well, hello there, folks. This is Scott once again, and welcome to another review. This time of the 1984 romantic comedy adventure film, Romancing the Stone. And yes, I do like this film, folks. I'll admit I'm not the biggest romantic comedy type guy, but I remember watching this quite a bit when I was young, and I liked it, believe it or not. It's the fact that, there wasn't just, that deal of adventure and danger and a little bit of action here and there. There was also great chemistry between Turner and Douglas, and the acting ability of Douglas and Turner. They made it work. This is why it still holds up very well today. In fact, yesterday, it turned 35. It came out March 30th, 1984. And 1984 was definitely the year I was born. And 1984 definitely had its good share of films as well, and luckily, this still holds up very well. And yes, this is the Blu-ray that I have. I remember watching this more on VHS back in the day when either my dad or my mom, more than likely my dad, bought the VHSs of this one and its sequel, Jewel of the Nile, which I do have, by the way. And I think it's a decent sequel. It's not quite as good as that's not quite as good as Romancing the Stone, but it's still a good sequel. There are far worse sequels. But yeah, anyway, it's got some good features. It's got some deleted scenes and documentaries about the making of the film, interviews with Douglas, Turner, and DeVito, and I think Robert Zemeckis is on there, but I could be wrong. But yeah, the film was also produced by Douglas himself, because he definitely needed to find something to kind of get him back into being the leading man again, because I guess the films that he was doing wasn't leading up to that, or he just wasn't considered leading man material or something like that, but this definitely helped him out in a way because the film ended up being successful. Plus, Robert Zemeckis himself definitely needed this boost because apparently he did 2 other films, and I guess they weren't really box office successes. And in fact, 20th Century Fox, who was producing this film and also distributing it, had him on for another film, believe it or not, which was Cocoon, and they fired him off that film because apparently when they were test screening this film, they thought it didn't look very good, and they thought he wasn't going to be right for Cocoon, so they fired him, which probably ended up being a big mistake, but because this film was successful. But here's the thing, Zemeckis was able to come up with a project of his own, and that project would become Back to the Future. He wrote and directed all 3, well, he directed all 3 films. I can't remember if he wrote all of them, but I know he wrote and directed the first one. And it showcased that he had the ability to tell a good story with some comedic elements and some sci-fi elements and any kind of elements that you can think of. It showed that he had the talent and demeanor to handle it, so yeah. In addition to with Douglas and Turner, you also have Danny DeVito, who's always, pretty good in his supporting roles. I've always liked DeVito and other stuff. There's too many films that I can name him in, but he definitely does a good job in there. And before I get to the other cast members, the film, like I said, is directed by Robert Zemeckis. He did films like this movie, Back to the Future. He did, what's the name of it? I should know. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? That's a classic right there. He also did Forrest Gump, Contact, I believe. What else? He was doing both Castaway and What Lies Beneath back to back. And he also did, what else did he do in the 2000s I should be familiar with? The Polar Express, Beowulf, Christmas Carol, Flight, The Walk, Doc Brown Saves the World. I guess that's like a little mini documentary of then Allied and Welcome to Merwin or something like that. So yeah, he's had a pretty solid filmography from what I've seen. But also in addition to this, I think I mentioned that Douglas produced this film too, and he showed that he can be the backbone of production companies and choose his scripts wisely. In fact, the screenwriter for this was actually a waitress named Diane Thomas, and she wrote this film during the time that she worked there, and Douglas somehow encountered her at the restaurant that she worked and liked her script and purchased it for, I believe, around $200,000. And the film was definitely successful, and Douglas wanted to, get her involved in the sequel, but unfortunately, she died in a car accident, and the car was actually the vehicle that was bought by Michael Douglas. And, unfortunately, she never got a chance to write that sequel, so yeah, it sucks. In fact, the sequel, Jewel of the Nile, was dedicated to her memory, so there you go. And in addition, you have Alan Silvestri, who did the score, and that was a great score. That was definitely one of the other highlights about the film. You also have cinematography by Dean Cundy. Did a lot of John Carpenter films, but this is also one of those films that he gets to showcase his ability to photograph, exotic, exotic environments and whatnot. And yeah, the film turned 35 years old and still holds up very well. And I'll get to the plot. Basically, Joan Wilder, Kathleen Turner, she plays this successful but lonely, romance novelist in New York City, going through her emotions in life. She encounters Gloria, who's Holland Taylor, and I forgot to mention the other cast members. Zach Norman plays Ira. He's one of the guys who kidnaps Joan Wilder's sister, Elaine, which I will get to eventually. You also have Alfonso Aru as Juan, the guy that kind of helps them escape another villain who's actually even worse, and that actor's name is Manuel Ojeda, who plays Colonel Zolo. And then, like I said, Holland Taylor plays Gloria, and then Mary Ellen Trainor plays Elaine Wilder, and actually she's sadly no longer with us anymore. I think she died a year or two ago, maybe even further than that. I don't know for sure. But anyway, Joan's going through life. She is successful. She just got through finishing up her latest work, and she's encountering and having a drink with her editor Gloria, and Gloria is kind of is kind of determined and wanting to help her friend get over the hump about meeting someone in life. And Joan only wants someone that comes from her novels and the people that she writes about. And she feels like some of the certain men are definitely not meeting up to her standards, and that's why she's not attached and whatnot. And then eventually Joan gets a call from her sister Elaine, who's in trouble. She's been held at ransom by these antique smugglers, by cousins Ira and Ralph, who's Danny DeVito's character. They want her to bring her the map that Joan eventually receives. And in addition to that, apparently an even meaner villain by the name of Colonel Zorro, who has somehow tracked Joan Wilder down. He actually kills her apartment supervisor later on in the film when he gets suspicious of him. And eventually Zola starts to follow her whenever Joan decides to leave from New York, and she has to go to Cartagena, Colombia, because that's where Elaine lives, and her husband lived down there. You eventually learn that Elaine's husband, I believe, sent the map and was actually killed none other than by Colonel Zolo, who butchered him up, and they always refer to him as the One Piece or whatever. So yeah, Zolo's a pretty vicious guy. And eventually, Zolo kind of is following her, and then eventually he gets to actually encounter her at the bus station to kind of create a diversion so that she gets on the wrong bus, because apparently he's well aware of, I guess, her sister being kidnapped or something, because apparently he's kind of local enforcement, but he's like very corrupt and very evil, of course. So eventually, Joan's been put on the wrong bus because he tricks her into going on the wrong bus, so that he can retrieve the map on his own accord, and to drive her away from the coastal city of Cartagena, where Elaine's being held. When Joan, tries to distract the bus driver to see if they're actually heading to the right place, they end up, the bus crashes into a Land Rover, wrecking both vehicles, and then the passengers walk away, and then Joan is eventually menaced by Zolo when he pulls out the gun on her, but then the Land Rover's owner and the American exotic bird smuggler Jack T. Colton, which is Douglas's character, is able to drive out Zolo by his shotgun, and eventually, because of this, the fact that the Jeep is totaled and he was trying to start a new life, and he's trying to get basically a sailboat, to kind of sail around the ocean. He has to start anew, but Joan proposes this contract idea for getting her out of the jungle. She proposes to pay Jack T. Colton $375 in traveler's checks, and they both agree. And then eventually, Joan and Jack, travel through the jungle while eluding the military, police, and Zolo, who is basically the main jefe there. And of course, they want the treasure map as well. And they go through this bridge which is old, and somehow Joan is able to use the rope and swing onto the other side, and Colton kind of does almost the same thing, except he lands more on the side of it. And then they go through this, they actually stay the night inside of a crashed down cargo plane that was pretty much abandoned and probably has yet to be discovered, where they get to know each other. And while Joan's reluctant to tell Jack what's really going on, eventually he finds the map, and Joan tells the real information about Elaine being held for ransom and wanting the map, and they realize they need to find a way to save her and whatnot. And Jack eventually proposes that they do something about this, but I'll get to that eventually. So eventually, while they're going through this small town where basically looks like drug dealers and thieves live there, kind of like a kind of shady kind of town. But eventually, when they encounter the main person, the drug lord, I guess you can say, is Juan, but he's a friendly guy apparently. And even though he tells them to hit the road, but when Jack speaks about Joan Wilder, he's apparently a fan of her, and actually he's like, Joan Wilder? The Joan Wilder? And he's like, I read your books, come on in. And apparently he reads the books to all these people of the village, and they're all like, wow, really? And they all get all friendly. He's like, adios, and they all walk away and whatnot. And they get to know Juan, and Joan Wilder needs them to get in the Jeep, get a vehicle to drive out of town and whatnot, so they can elude Zolo, who's actually in that town. Eventually they do. They use a truck where they're able to escape from them, and then they go into another town where Juan drops them off, and apparently Ralph is there, and he attempts to actually get the map from them at some point during the time that both Jack and Joan... Not Jack and Joan. Yeah, Jack and Joan. Sorry, Jack and Joan. They're having dinner. They actually, end up, getting close and whatever, after she gives them, the Travis checks. And, of course, Jack buys her dinner and even buys her some new rags and clothes for her to dress in. And they dance, and then... and apparently... Howard Jack secretly tries to Xerox the map and whatnot to locate what would be called a little place and locate the enormous emerald known as the El Corazon, which is actually a green stone inside of a kind of a statue. And and when they got there, they actually stole Ralph's car, who actually was sleeping in the back. And eventually, Ralph gets to them. They actually he actually holds them at gunpoint and actually steals the stone, and even says that Jack is basically a Carnos because of his ability to, I guess you can say he charms, but yeah. But eventually Zolo appears, and Ralph tries to get away from them, despite the fact that he has the emerald, but Jack's able to wrestle it back, and they end up driving into the river, and they both go into a waterfall. They end up on opposite sides of the river, and Jack has the emerald and Joan has the map, and Jack directs Joan to Cartagena, where he will eventually meet her there. And in Cartagena, Joan meets with Ira, who is still holding Elaine. But unfortunately, eventually, it's the exchange, even though she gives him the map and it's legit, and she gets Elaine back. Unfortunately, Zolo happens to also be there and interrupt the exchange. They also have captured Jack as well, who in turns kind of surrenders the emerald to Zolo after Zolo kind of cuts Joan Wilder's hand on kind of above her thumb and drain the blood into the alligators and whatnot. And then when eventually he kicks the emerald to Zolo, at that same time the crocodile bites off his fucking hand and swallows it along with the emerald. And then eventually a gun battle takes place between Zolo's soldiers and Ira's gang. And Joan and Elaine dash for safety, being pursued by Zolo. And Jack, has to invade, Zolo's soldiers and tries to actually steal the emerald back. He even tries to wrestle from the crocodile from behind, but then he has to let it go when he notices that Joan and Zolo are going at it. And then when when Joan tried to actually stole his knife and try to throw it at Zolo, he actually blocks it, and that somehow makes Elaine faint and whatnot. And they both are wrestling and struggling. But eventually, Joan grabs Zolo's cigar, which is still in his mouth, and pushes it onto his left cheek, and then grabs a piece of wood and bashes on Zolo's missing hand, bloodied hand, twice, and this angers him, and he gets thrown into he gets thrown onto the torchlight, and then he tries to slash his way at Joan, but she dodges, and he ends up falling into this crocodile pit, and of course is killed. Ira and his men escape, but unfortunately Ralph is left behind to the authorities. And then Jack realizes, he's got to get out of there because him and Cartagena cops go way back, and he decides he has to go after the emerald, but not before he shares a kiss with Joan and tells her that you'll always be all right, Joan. You always were. And then he jumps in there. Then some months later, after Joan has actually published another novel or new manuscript based on the adventures that she encountered, and Gloria is pretty much moved by this and is in tears and basically tells her she has another hit on her hand. And eventually, when she is returning back to her apartment, she sees a new sailboat named Angelina, which apparently you see, which is actually based on Joan's novels. And apparently, we see Jack come out of the boat, and he is actually wearing the boots that were made from the crocodile skin. And of course, he tells her that the crocodile died of indigestion because of the emerald. He was able to sell it and buy the boat of his dreams, pretty much. And he basically couldn't stop thinking about Joan. And they share a kiss and embrace one another, and they go off together, planning to sail around the world. And we see that it's being drove, and that's how the film ends. Overall, minus my inconsistencies here and there, like I said, I really do enjoy this film. It's mainly because of the chemistry between Douglas and Turner. They really make this film very well. And there's some nice little comedic elements whenever Ralph is in there. Like whenever he actually ends up picking up Zolo and he's actually wanted for some kind of record and whatnot, he tries to say, Zola thinks he's American, and Ralph says, Americanos, I spit in them. And then Zola says in his subtitled language, you must be French then, or something. But yeah, there's just some great adventures in this movie, and great fun moments, and nice caring moments, and trustworthy, even though you can tell that Jack even though he can be trustworthy, he can be doing this to his own advantage, like he wants to attain the jewel, and of course he'll let Joan have the map and whatever, but yeah. But yeah, I can't really think of any cons to this. Maybe there's little pacing issues here and there, but nothing that really downs the film. It's just that I don't know what kind of flaw I can see in this. Maybe I don't know. I don't know, honestly, but it's just a really fun adventure, and great heartwarming moments where Joan has finally found someone that has that same adventurous spirit like she yearns for, and he definitely wears the hat and whatnot. That reminds her of the character that we saw earlier and what she was depicting in her when she was finishing up her earlier manuscript, and just the chemistry, just like everything about this. I never really reviewed a romantic type film before, but that both Douglas and Turner make it work. They have natural chemistry. They have just natural likableness to them, even if Jack can be, a little bit deceitful, but he has good intentions to some degree. Like he could have easily, not let go of the croc, but he sees Joan in danger, and he decides, what, fuck it, I'm going to try and save her, even though apparently he actually runs out of bullets out of that gun, and he actually tries to climb on this castle-like structure, but eventually Joan is able to, save herself to some degree. She's able to defend herself. She's able to, knock out Zolo, or, well, not knock out, but at least just go toe-to-toe with him despite all that. What else? Just certain lines like Ira, who who's kind of like, I guess, not exactly a mean guy. He actually has his own little pet crocodiles. Like whenever Elaine's not eating her steak, for example, he actually grabs the steak and throws it at the baby crocodiles. Well, maybe not their babies, but their medium-sized crocodiles. He goes like, "Look at those snappers, will you?" And apparently, when Joan is being dragged by Zola, whenever Zola cuts her hand and drains the blood, he even says that same line, "Hey, man, look at those snappers." And yeah. And the guy that played Zolo did a pretty solid job of playing a very, nasty villain. He really is. Like, you see him, like, just fucking stab a guy and doesn't say much because, he doesn't want any witnesses. And then when he's back in his own home country or state in Colombia, he demands information and even tries, I don't know if he rapes her or whatnot, but he actually, grabs a woman that's just, susking corn and whatnot, and just grabs her, and we don't see what happens though, but he's just a mean, nasty villain. And then he decides to toy with Joan Wilder and cut her hand and let the blood drain so that maybe the crocs who hunger for blood might go at her. Just shows that he's a very cunning and nasty villain. And the actor did a good job. And the score, that's what really elevates this film. Alan Silvestri is definitely one hell of a composer. He's definitely one of my favorites. Like the adventure and the romantic aspects of it, he does a really great job on that. And of course, how can I say, the acting? The acting is what really holds it up. All the actors do a fine job. They are what make this film. And I can't think of anything else what to say other than that. It's a great feel-good movie. Fun, adventurous, a little bit of danger, and it just works very well. And it showed why Robert Zemeckis would be successful in his later work, like in Back to the Future. He's a very confident director. He knows what he wants. He shows his ability to handle action, dramatic moments, comedic moments, you name it. It shows in his work, and that's why he's still working today, at least for the most part. That's why he's had several classics under his belt. He didn't return for the sequel though. But, it showed that he can do sequels like in the Back to the Future. And I like Forrest Gump. And his other work. I like Castaway. Hell, I don't mind What Lies Beneath. So, yeah. Anywho, I think I'm going to end this, folks, because I don't know what else to say. It's just if you haven't seen this, go and watch it. It's worth it. It's a great classic that still holds up 35 years. It's well worth it on Blu-ray, which I do have. It's got good features. I like how we get deleted scenes, like we see alternate versions of Joan and Jack, reveal themselves to each other. I like how they did that in this version as well. And I like how they describe how this film got made and in the process, and how unfortunately Diane Thomas, didn't write the sequel. That was one of the weak points about the sequel, is it didn't have the strong writing aspect. It just wasn't as well thought out. So, but yeah, this film, go watch it. You won't be disappointed. It's definitely a fun and adventurous ride for sure. And like I said before, Alan Silvestri's score really helps it up, at the moments where it's dramatic, comedic, or adventurous, or the thrill of danger. And the acting of Douglas, Turner, and DeVito, they would become a great trio, and they would definitely have a little more interaction with them in the sequel for a bit more, I think. But they definitely had a lot more of that in the third film they would do, War of the Roses. So, but you know what? I'm going too far. I'm going to end it here. Go watch this film. Rent it on YouTube. It's available on there, and I guarantee you will like it. It's great. Definitely, if you want to have a date night, this is definitely a good movie to watch. So, I'd recommend it. So, yeah. Anywho, I may review the sequel sooner or later. I don't know when, but I will. Okay, I'll see you in another video, folks. Later.